I look like I'm about to rob a house. I don't know if you even care, but when I was a little tot, I used to play The Sims 3, and in The Sims 3, there's this character that was a burglar, and I don't know if he had a name. I think he was literally called the burglar. But if you don't lock the doors in your house, sometimes he'll come in and he'll walk in with this big black sack like Santa Claus, and he'll come in and just take things from your house, like a fridge, a couch. I had a cat stolen from him once. Like, he just takes anything and everything, and it's like literally stolen from you, so you have to rebuy it. But immediately when I looked at my camera, I'm like, I am the burglar. Here's a picture of him, if you're curious. If you haven't played the game, play it. It's fun. Anyways, I hope that your weekend has treated you well and you remain safe and healthy and productive. My weekend was super productive because not only did I take like 6 walks with my dog, but I also learned how to work my green screen. And I am so freaking proud of this, y'all. Countless hours were spent just crying and getting frustrated. And it turns out that all of the pain and anguish comes from the fact that I just didn't have good lighting in my room. Regardless, it's beautiful, isn't it? Absolutely beautiful. Now, I am new, and although I think I did a wonderful job and I'm very proud of myself, I know that it's not going to be super crisp and nice because trust me when I say that the weathermen and the YouTubers that use green screens, they make it seem so freaking easy, but it's not. It's not easy at all. I'm actually going to put a soundbite of applause so that I can get some sort of recognition because I'm just staring at the computer and I'm proud of myself, but I need something tangible to remind me that I'm worth it. So here's my 5 seconds narcissistic applause. And I think that you, as students, deserve a round of applause as well, because even though you probably were not messing with the green screen over the weekend, you finished your first full new NTI schedule. So that's awesome. Like, you all are killing it. So last week we talked about propaganda in video games and in the movie industry. Specifically, we talked about how the United States military uses propaganda to get people to support the war or to get them to join the military. Essentially, what the military is doing is they're using already existing platforms, like the Hollywood movie industry, as another avenue to spread their message across the United States. As somebody who does not have a close family member who is in the military, I never grew up listening to stories about what they have experienced. The only experience I've had with understanding or hearing about war stories was through movies and video games. So they wanted to reach people like me who otherwise may not have heard about the amazing benefits of the military and to get me to start thinking about joining the military. So I say this time and time again, and I just wanted to push this more and more to you guys, that history is really a study of relationships, of connections. And right now in our current era, we are being constantly bombarded and strangled with advertisements on a daily basis. We're being told what we should and should not buy. We're being told what we should and should not do constantly. I encourage you one day to stick a timer, like a kitchen timer, on your lap and scroll through Instagram for like 5 minutes and see how many different advertisements you see. You don't realize how many there are until you are forced to reconcile with that. Because we tend to ignore a lot of advertisements. If I'm watching Hulu and there's an advertisement that pops up about Toyota Tundras, I know what their intentions are. The intentions that they have is for me to watch the video or the advertisements and go out and buy a Toyota Tundra. And so a lot of us subconsciously even understand that and remove ourselves from the situation, just completely ignore the advert. However, when they're hidden into something that we are not thinking of as being influenced or driven by an alternative motive, it's harder for us to deal with that information. If I'm watching something like The Avengers and I'm enjoying the movie and I'm seeing these really cool planes and really cool weapons that they use, although a lot of them are fictional, and it's hard for me to deal with that information as well as I could if I just knew straight up this is made and produced by the United States military. I want you to start to think about that because this is where that intersection between history and society is at best. I mean, we are really getting pulled in a million directions every single day. And learning to navigate that is an effective tool for you to just be focused on what matters to you and what you're passionate about. One thing I did fail to mention last week that I think is incredibly important is that the federal government is not the only group to use propaganda to gain support. And you might say,
well, duh, Miss Jump. Of course, federal government is not the only thing in the world to use propaganda. Propaganda has been used throughout history.
And I would tell that fictionalized student in my head that you are absolutely right. But once again, there's this misconception that propaganda is inherently from the government to the people to basically brainwash the people into thinking a certain way. And that's not what it is. So other than the federal government, every single social movement that we have discussed in this class includes the use of propaganda. If you forget what a social movement is a group of people who either want to maintain, destroy, or fix a problem in society. And most of the time they are very scattered, meaning that they're not centralized. There's no leader that's kind of standing up for the people. There's pockets of supporters all over the United States. And so you don't have this grand coalition. The ones that we do know of, the very strong and well-known social movements, are able to unionize all of the fragmentation into one. Because they're so scattered and they don't have a leader, they have to rely on their message to gain the support that they need to be successful. We have talked about a variety of social movements in this class, and I'm going to start from the very beginning, and I've only listed about 5 of them. Reconstruction movement, industrial movement, the anti-monopoly movement, the flapper movement, and the civil rights movement. So let's talk about the importance of propaganda to the social movements. Just like the United States military, many social movements use propaganda as a voice to gather the support that they need to enact the change that they want to see. So there's a science to social movements, and the most important thing to having a successful social movement is to rely on reaching as many people as possible. Because the more you talk and spread your ideas, the more people will listen. And the more people will listen, the more they will think. And the more they will think, the more they will support your movement. And the more that supports the movement, the stronger your movement becomes. And that cycle continues on and on. As I mentioned earlier, we are constantly being buried in advertisements that seek to grab our attention. There's been studies that found that some 5,000 to 10,000 advertisements are seen by an average adult on a daily basis, guys. Daily basis. So if you want to get someone to pay attention to your political cause or your social cause, you have to get them to first look at your cause. And that's what we've been talking about with propaganda. Making some of those biases and some of those practices that you see in propaganda used in the spread of social movements throughout American history. So I want to use an example that we have discussed fairly recently, and it's an example that I'm sure many of you enjoy learning about some more, and that is the Civil Rights Movement. Now, if you forgot, the Civil Rights Movement took place in the 1950s and 60s and sought to make segregation and racial inequality illegal in the United States. And I'm going to have you watch a video here. And while you're watching the video, I want you to ask yourselves 2 questions. 1, how do the civil rights leaders use the media to effectively spread their message? And 2, how could this be a form of propaganda? I'll see you after the video.
As a story, the civil rights movement had it all. Good versus evil, drama, social upheaval. But at first, America's major media ignored it, especially in the South.
It was our responsibility to find a way to dramatize the issue.
Congressman John Lewis says that the movement's leaders realized to bring change, they needed to reach white Americans.
How did you do that?
As a movement, we literally put our bodies on the line.
Influence on the civil rights coverage.
Hank Klibanoff co-wrote The Race Beat, a book about the media and the movement.
Well, race was a big story in the South, beginning in the 40s and 50s. It's just that no one knew about it.
Finally, by 1957, major northern newspapers discovered the drama and the story.
How do you feel about integrated passengers?
The television networks followed. Even major southern media paid attention. to the open hatred
You've got to keep the white and the black separate.
and the violent response to peaceful protest.
If you're going to beat us in the light of day. Beat us while the camera's on.
This was Selma, Alabama, 1965, among the bloodied John Lewis.
American people could not stand it. To see young children and old women being knocked down by fire hoses and chased by police dogs.
We will dramatize this whole situation by marching by the thousands.
Television also found Martin Luther King.
The Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. will face the nation.
Americans heard a leader who shattered racial stereotypes.
We feel that the time has come for a full-scale assault on the system of segregation.
This man is someone you could actually talk to and who seemed quite reasonable. And for white Southerners, this was new information.
And part of a national awakening.
It was the media that carried our message to the rest of the nation.
Protest became progress once the media woke up and Americans rose up.
Thank God Almighty, we are free at last.
Mark Strassman, CBS News, Atlanta.
So now that we've talked about in the past how Martin Luther King Jr. used nonviolent protest to kind of fight back the system, but what we didn't really talk about was the fact that he might have used it in part because the image that it shows on TVs across the nation. He knew that having an image, having something that people can rally behind, is going to be effective to gaining more support for the movement. He not only believed that nonviolent protests were better morally, but it offered a better chance of showcasing the unequal treatment of segments of the population who may not be aware of the struggles of the African Americans in the South. And that helped people to support the movement by pulling on their heartstrings after seeing a video of a bunch of school children being run down with fire hoses. And just like the military, he used an existing platform, the news media, to get people to believe his message of peace, love, and equality. And he did it very effectively. Now, believe it or not, the same issues that was fought over in the civil rights movement is still being fought over today. And many of you guys know this. You watch the news, you see the protests. A lot of the modern political movements that we see of today are influenced by MLK's use of real-time propaganda, using real-life images and video to capture the support of Americans who otherwise probably would not care at all about the movement. And they are following in his footsteps by continuing this pattern of using those platforms that already exist to reach people that would not have been reached otherwise. So what you're going to do today is you're going to be comparing the Black Lives Matter protest movement to the civil rights movement. And for those who may be less aware, the Black Lives Matter movement was created in 2013. And it was created after a white officer named George Zimmerman shot and killed a 17-year-old boy named Trayvon Martin. And George Zimmerman was arrested and sent to trial, and he was found not guilty of the murder of Trayvon Martin. And immediately it started this whole movement of people just getting sick and tired of the police brutality on African Americans. And so Black Lives Matter was created as a way to seek the destruction of discrimination faced by African Americans in the United States. They are most well known for their marches, and in those marches you oftentimes see people holding photographs of people that they have lost through police brutality. And that's intentional. It wants you to look at that and feel the emotions and connect with the protesters so that they are growing their movement even further. Now, just like MLK had his growth through the use of the news media, the Black Lives Matter movement is using another form of media that did not exist back when Martin Luther King was alive, and that is social media. And just like MLK intentionally using nonviolent protests and getting the cameras to take photographs, the Black Lives Matter movement is doing the exact same thing, but on Twitter. And these real-life images of peaceful protests being met with National Guards look almost exactly the same as the pictures that you see during the Civil Rights era. So the first thing you're going to be doing is you're going to look at two images side by side, one of the Black Lives Matter movement and one of the Civil Rights movement. And I want you to find 2 similarities and 2 differences, either between the movements themselves or the photographs. And finally, you're going to have to answer 4 questions. And the questions are, and this is in order, do you feel any emotions while looking at the photographs? Do you believe that the Civil Rights Movement or the Black Lives Matter movement would be strong if it not for the images shown above? Why or why not? How does propaganda, like the images shown above, help to gain support for social movements? And what is something that you're passionate about that you would consider joining a social movement over? And as always, this will be due on Thursday. I'm actually very excited for Thursday. On Thursday, I'm actually going to be talking about the inclusion of protest music in social change and social movements. And I'm super excited because it's like one of those subjects that I love to talk about. So hopefully you guys enjoy it as well. I've been doing a lot of research on it and trying to get the best material, so I look forward to kind of sharing that with you guys on Thursday. Sunday night, I stayed up and I updated grades. I've had some emails from students who say oh, I have something that's incomplete, but I turned it in. I don't know what's going on. If I were you, I would check Infinite Campus and see if there are assignments that you're missing that I do not have. And we can try to find it on your Google Drive or, something. I honestly, and I said this again last week, but I think Google Classrooms is out to get me. I think it's trying to murder me. If you have questions, if you have concerns, if you are just frustrated with Google Classrooms, come talk to me. I'm always open on email, I'm always open on my Google Classrooms, and I'm always open on my Remind Me. So I hope that you have a good rest of the week, and I'll see you back here on Thursday.